So today I thought I would share with you something that was taught to me a number of years ago when I worked in the church that was going through enormous conflict and transition. All right. And it's the 5 stages of conflict. And honestly, since I was taught it by a mentor, I've seen it everywhere and I try to let it influence the way that I go about dealing with conflict. Okay. But what I would like to do is share with you this chart that I had created and talk through every part of it and talk through each of these 5 stages because I think once you know them, you can see them happening. And then when you see them happening, perhaps you and I and everyone, we can maybe try to de escalate things in a way that's appropriate, you know? And of course, why not try to understand it in the context of Christian spirituality? All right. So let's go ahead and get into it. Just sit back. I have no idea how long this one's going to be, but I hope it's a worthwhile one. All right. Let's get into it. All right. So this is organized in a way that it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it escalates. We're going to talk through each of them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we're going to go across talking about what is the signifying event, what does it look like, what's a modern example, what's a biblical example, what Jesus does not do, and then how does Jesus seem to de-escalate or frustrate the usual approach of conflict. All right. So let's start with stage 1. It goes like this. Stage 1 is just a disagreement. Just a disagreement. And so here's a modern example. 2 people disagree about what movie to watch at the movie theater. Person A wants to see Wonka, and person B wants to watch some Godzilla movie. Who knows? Right? But there's a disagreement. That is understood as the first stage of conflict. And what some people do is they mistake stage 1, disagreement, for being stage 5, which is full out conflict and violence. Just because there's a disagreement, it does not mean it's a full-fledged conflict. But it can lead that way if it's unaddressed or not de-escalated in some way. But what's a biblical example of stage 1? It would be the Pharisees hear people saying Jesus is the Christ, to which they disagree. They just say, no, it's not the case. That's it. There's nothing more beyond just a simple disagreement, right? But what does Jesus not do? Is he does not avoid conversing with the Pharisees who disagree with him. He does not do that. And instead, he goes to them and he says, hey, follow me. You know, what does it look like in the face of disagreement to still move toward the other person rather than away from them? Stage 2 is when it escalates, it becomes an argument. So a modern example could be a win-win is not established between 2 people who disagree, and so it escalates into arguing and yelling. Let's imagine those 2 people seeing Wonka or some Godzilla movie, and they are in the lobby of the movie theater, and they are now starting to yell at each other. You see veins popping in their neck, right? And as a result, it's no longer just a disagreement. It's kind of a spectacle at this point. What's a biblical example? The Pharisees begin arguing with Jesus. Maybe it's public, maybe it's in private, maybe they start raising their voice and you can see the face is starting to get flushed. You can see their eyes are starting to become more attentive because they are invested in winning their side of the argument. But what does Jesus not do? He doesn't shame the other person for their stance. He does not make them feel humiliated. He can correct them, and he can supply them a different approach or a different stance or different way of thinking about something. But it's not really Jesus's mode to shame the other person for being on the other side of an argument. So how does Jesus seem to de-escalate? Well, Jesus quotes the Pharisees' own tradition back to them. He tries to show them that they're still on the same page. So when arguments increase, it's important to recognize we're on the same page. At least we're still for each other. Okay, we can have a difference of opinion, we can think different thoughts, that's fine. But that doesn't mean that there needs to be a shaming or pushing away of the other that's got some intensity behind it, some volume behind it, right? Now, stage 3 is fascinating. This is when there is a formation of sides. So in the movie theater example, the Wonka versus Godzilla, the two people are starting to have their way, and their friend group are paying attention. And they're there and they're like, ooh, Wonka's making a good point. Ooh, Godzilla's making a good point. Well, that's that, and that's that. And so the friend group splits and stands behind the respective person that they agree with. And so the disagreement that started with two intensified into an argument, but then it becomes the formation of sides. Now there's tribes. Now there's like a clan that wants to see Godzilla, and there's a clan that wants to see Wonka, and now it's escalated in number. Okay? And a biblical example of this could be the public debates of Jesus versus the Pharisees, in which bystanders chose a side. And in every one of these instances where Jesus and the Pharisees seemed to be having an argument in public, people started to rally around the sides of the people that they agreed with. Whether people agreed with the Pharisees or people agreed with Jesus, you can guarantee that there started to become like an invisible line between one faction and the other. And what does Jesus not do? He does not take his disciples and leave to avoid the conflict. He goes, yes, he travels around in like Caesarea Philippi and all these other regions, but he doesn't do it for the sake of just avoiding conflict. He's got tasks to do over there. But Jesus does not seem interested in cutting off what could be a potential conversation that could be de-escalated, it seems. Okay? When there's a disagreement and people have to choose to still be facing towards each other rather than walk away, like in an argument might happen, it's just the same thing. It's just now it's with more people. The people have to choose to still be in dialogue, even though they're in arguing, even though they are arguing in their posture, right? Walking away from each other is actually the breakdown. At least if you're arguing, you're still invested in each other. At least if you're still facing each other, one group to the other, you're still trying to work it out. But as soon as you walk away, the conflict has now taken another turn. So Jesus doesn't take the disciples. What does Jesus do instead? Jesus has dinner at the home of a well-known Pharisee. Zacchaeus, you know the story? And so Jesus, instead of avoiding those he argues with, he brings his disciples into the home of the people he is arguing with. So that is a drastic movement forward toward the other person. That's actually quite a display of hospitality rather than hostility. And so Jesus is quite strategic because he brings the argument to the home turf of the other person and then does it over meal, which is in biblical framework, consciousness, Hebrew consciousness, we could say, that is a display of covenantal relationship to share a meal with someone else. So let's go to stage 4. Stage 4 is, I think, one of the most fascinating stages. This is when there's the formation of a neutral middle space, a middle group. Okay. So using the Wonka Godzilla friend group, uh, a remnant of the friend group stands off to the side. They don't join the Wonka tribe. They don't join the Godzilla tribe. They're in the middle, off to the side. And out of fear of both sides, they don't take any side. Okay. And this is, you can kind of imagine this. Like, let's say even there's two gangs that are fighting, and all of a sudden, there's some people that choose to step back and just kind of see who wins or who doesn't win. They don't want to join the Wonka tribe because then the Godzilla people will be angry at them, but they don't want to join the Godzilla tribe because then the Wonka people will be frustrated, angry at them. And so the middle people, they're just afraid of breaking down a relationship. And so for that reason, they avoid taking a stance, which doesn't necessarily help. Okay. It's a passive stance. It doesn't actually work towards de-escalating anything. It's really just a passive bystander. And when that happens, as soon as you have people that are desperately trying to stay neutral, you need to be very careful because things are incredibly tense and they're about to go to stage 5, but we'll get there. What's an example of this? Well, in the Bible, Jesus is caught by the Roman centurions, and he's brought before a midnight trial. He's found guilty of heresies and other things. But then, before Pilate, the Roman official of the day, Pilate washes his hands and says, I am not a part of this. Peter denounces Jesus 3 times. I don't know that man. I'm not for or against him. I just don't even know him. Okay. And everyone else that did not want to stand for or against Jesus, the Pharisees, the Romans. That would be the formation of a middle. Pilate knew that the next stage was going to be all-out violence. And in the words of Gamaliel in the New Testament, it's better for one man to die than for the whole nation. But what does Jesus not do here? He does not tell people to not get involved, since passivity and peacekeeping are not the same thing as peacemaking. We have a tendency in church culture to value the people that never start a disagreement, right? We love the people that never start a disagreement that could lead to an argument, that could lead to formation of sides, that could lead to a neutral middle group. But that's still a passive stance, as we said, and Jesus doesn't really say to get on the sidelines and just wait to see who wins and then side with that. No, it's important to take a side. And then, once you take that side, work towards de-escalating and finding a way to try to keep some common ground of at least hospitality and goodwill. You don't have to agree, but at least ratchet it back down from escalating into violence. So how does Jesus seem to de-escalate? Well, Jesus says, anyone who does the will of the Father is my brother or sister. It's a very inclusive statement. Okay, the family lines are redrawn around whoever loves. Do you love people? Great, we're on the same team. Okay, what about Wonka, Godzilla? I don't know. We have opinions, but at least we both agree love is a good thing. Right? Find the common ground. Also, Jesus invites people to set their hand to the plow, to get active in the right way. Jesus is not interested in passivity. He's about intentional action that brings people and things together. He's not looking to start any form of violence, although people expected that of him. And he just doesn't play that game. So let's do stage 5, and then we'll wrap it up. Stage 5 is when we have all-out conflict or violence. Now, it can be verbal violence. It can be threats being made, whether they are verbal or written or cyberbullying or graffiti. I mean, you can imagine a whole plethora of things, but it also includes not just verbal violence, but also physical violence. And a modern example of this could be the Wonka group and the Godzilla group all out have a fight in the middle of the movie theater lobby with fists flying, curses being shouted, blood being drawn, and spit and torn clothes and all that jazz. It's really kind of pathetic when you think about a fight that could happen over something so little as a disagreement about movies. But the fact is, any disagreement that's poorly navigated has the potential to increase and increase and increase until it becomes all out violence. And of course, this is exactly what war is. War is the utter failure to de escalate what started as a disagreement by failing or avoiding thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds, maybe even millions of little conversations that could have kept one country from having no issue with war with another. So, what's a biblical example of this type of violence? The scapegoating crucifixion of Jesus by people that refused to take responsibility for it. So there was some disagreements about Jesus that led into arguments, that led into the formation of sides, that led into the formation of a neutral middle. And so they decided, let's just have all out violence against this person, as if to exclude or kill, scapegoat, the person who started the disagreement means that there would never be any more conflict on that topic again. It's just not the case. What does Jesus not do? He does not fight back. He does not draw a sword and attack the soldiers in the Garden of Gethsemane. Peter does. Peter draws a sword and cuts off the ear of the servant Malchus, who Jesus then heals his ear. But Jesus doesn't pick fights like this. When things have the potential to turn to violence, Jesus' mode is not to pick up a knife, a sword, spear, gun, nuke. The way of Jesus is about constant de-escalation. Not that there's a lack of conflict, and that doesn't mean passivity or neutrality, but the way of Jesus is one that does not give into violence, that does not give into tearing each other apart. Which, in other videos, I think I made comments of this. The word diabolical comes from two words, dia and bolos, or dia and balein in Greek, meaning two, and then sticks. You could break a stick in half, right? One stick becomes two. Or I think the verb balein means to throw. So you take something and you throw it apart. You take something like a stick, you snap it in half, you throw one half away. So something is inherently diabolical if it snaps the relationship between two people and then throws them apart. And then if you want to maximize that out into groups, that's what happens when you have whole countries that snap and then go to war at each other and then distance, at least emotionally, but they're in full out violence when they're in person. Jesus does not draw a sword. And so how does Jesus de-escalate? Well, at least in the New Testament, Jesus says, Father, forgive them. They do not know what they are doing. He does not retaliate. And in fact, he then prays for those who are in violence against him. We have this myth of retributive justice, that if somebody is trying to kill you, you should kill them. that if they pluck out your eye, you should pluck out their eye. The way of Jesus is not interested in equal retribution back. Which is striking. So when we think about conflict, we need to keep these 5 stages in mind. I try to, and in my better moments, I can catch myself when I'm starting to give into stage 2. In my better moments, when I start getting frustrated at people that maybe are on the other side of stage 3 that are joining the other team, I try to catch this in myself when I get annoyed at people staying neutral, because okay, they're in stage 4, or they perceive things at stage 4. And so they're actually very worried about all out violence. Maybe they've got a very low tolerance for anxiety in their friend group. You know, neutrality is really not a virtue as some people think. But I try to catch these things when I notice them stirring in myself, when I notice myself feeling like, okay, things need to escalate in a proper way. So, well, not always, no. And so it's important to try to find ways to constantly de-escalate, be a peacemaker but not a peacekeeper, to choose a side and stay on a side, to have integrity and stay firm in one's convictions, but then to never resort into giving into full-out violence. So as I think about Christian spirituality and formation, when I think about how we need to grow and constantly grow our whole life long, I wonder why we don't talk about this more often. Maybe it's because it's not known, right? But yeah. I guess that's it. I really hope that these videos are helpful. For me, they were incredibly helpful frameworks. They were incredibly helpful pieces of wisdom that I remember thinking, wow, I got all the way through seminary and I didn't learn any of this stuff there. So I hope it helps you. Yeah. Have a great day. Grace and peace.